So greetings, hello. We're now in the Muse room of Polyhymnia. Polyhymnia is the muse that deals with the sacred, the religious aspects of life. And her name actually means many hymns in ancient Greek. The Greeks loved music, they loved chants, they loved hymns, and in Delphi and other sacred centres there were always hymns going on. We have these things that have come down called the Orphic hymns from the time of Orpheus and the Orphic fraternity. So you've got to think of these Greek temples. There were hymns and songs to the gods and goddesses. And that tradition lives on. So that's why this room is the many hymns room. And it houses all the religious items to do with the institute here. So this is our main meditation area. So each morning, or each kind of normally about noon, we'll have a group meditation here. Whoever's visiting, light a candle, use the Tibetan gongs to start the proceedings, say some prayers, and sometimes people do a chant or a hymn, and in different languages. I've had guests visiting from every different country speaking different languages. And so we also have other sacred things. We have the peace sword of the Druids of Britain, which is now in Europe, so I'm the peace druid of Europe. This is my badge of office. The words of peace are on the blade. This sword was produced in 1999 for the millennium, and I'm the proud bearer of this sword. I will bequeath it to the next peace druid of Europe, whoever that is that comes forward and is worthy of it. It's not my personal property, and as peace druid for the Council of British Orders of Druids, I'm also holding this sword. There are three goddesses, the Mother, Maiden and Crone, who watch over the work of druids and sages in all traditions. I don't care what your religion is. We do this work for humanity and for the women of humanity particularly, who give birth to us. We honour them. And that's why peace is so important. In fact, peace was the name of a Roman goddess, Pax. And in Greek she's called Irene, the Greek goddess. And she was an attendant of Aphrodite. Irene is an attendant of the goddess of love. I think Greek mythology is really, really profound, and Pythagoras explained it all, because peace is an attendant of love. Without love, there cannot be peace. And you can't have one without the other. Because if you have violence, you have not love, you have rape and war crimes and killing. And right now we have 8 million Ukrainian women and children who've had to flee their country. That's not peace, that's not justice. So anyway, that's one of the objects in this room. And I'll also show you this, which is the Delphic Games insignia. The Delphic Games is an attempt to restart the Games of Delphi, which were going for 1,000 years like the Olympic Games. Only there the artists, musicians, poets and theatre people came together. There was no sport as such, it wasn't dancing. It was dancing and theatre, but not like javelins and long distance running and stuff. That was the Olympic Games. And what we, the Delphic Games, are saying is, let's revive the Delphic Games with as much clout and importance around the world as the Olympic Games. They took place every 4 years after, they were in a 4-year cycle, spaced between the Olympic Games. So there was 2 years between the Delphic Game and the Olympic Games. That's the badge produced by my friend Christian Kirsch in Berlin, who's appointed me as the educational director of the Delphic Games. And, it's a great honour. Underneath that is this very important periodic table of the world's religions and philosophies, based on the Mendeleev table of the elements, which I produced. Because as a philosopher, I want to know how all these different religions fit together. Why is Buddhism slightly different to Jainism? What about Sikhism? Why different types of Islam? Or different types of Christianity? Why the Catholics and Protestants? So this table, which you'll see a much bigger close-up view in a minute, gives you an insight into the whole history of them. And I'm recording in my philosophy club some more in-depth studies of that. And that's based on my work for 30 years as a teacher of comparative philosophy and comparative religion. So Anyway, this room is amazing. There's enough literature in this room to keep you busy for a lifetime. The first religion I really got into was Buddhism when I was a young existentialist growing up in Brighton with Marxist mother telling me to read Karl Marx. That was the answer. And I read him and I didn't find the answer. So I moved on to study Buddhism. I studied Chogyam Trungpa, Tibetan Buddhism. And this is the collection of the Buddhist library. I have some amazing Buddhist sculptures, some of which are quite old. You know, and I resonated with this idea of Buddha that actually we can't build a perfect society, whether you want to call that communism or socialism or liberal democracy, unless we transform ourselves, unless we ourselves reach enlightenment. And that comes in different degrees and stages. At least we should be working towards that. And that's the Bodhisattva vow, which I personally took when I first heard about this. Quite seriously, at the age of 19, 20, I went to London, met an old Tibetan tantric teacher who gave me a red thread, and I took the vow to be a bodhisattva, which means to work for the enlightenment of everyone on this planet. You can't just get personal enlightenment, it has to be for us all. So since then I've taught Buddhist studies, I've taught comparative Buddhist studies. I'm interested in all branches of Buddhism, Zen, Vajrayana, and what I call Metta Mahayana, which is the kind of California Gary Snyder eco-Buddhism. Thich Nhat Hanh used to teach just down the road in Plum Village, which is a great Zen Vietnamese Buddhist tradition that he was teaching. I've had friends that come here after leaving Plum Village, and you know, if you want to come and visit me here for a week, then go on to Plum Village, that's fine. This is a sort of sister centre. So, yeah, and I'm now teaching a course on enlightenments, plural, comparing and contrasting the enlightenment experience in different schools of spirituality, be it Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism or Islam or whatever. I take the view that I think you can get enlightened whatever your starting point, whether you're a Christian or a humanist or Jewish or a Kabbalist. But there's specific ladders of progress you need to make from those traditions. Okay, so here you'll see in a minute, but there's a huge collection of books on Islam down on the bottom of the shelf. This whole wall is covered in, I don't know, several thousand books. There's a huge collection on Islam, which I've studied and taught for many years. I've been initiated into Sufism. I love my Islamic friends. I accept the concept of Islam, which means to surrender and be at peace. You surrender to the absolute. I'm a Hegelian Muslim. I believe that we have to surrender to the absolute because nobody's big enough to fight the absolute. Like, we have to give up and surrender. And that is what Islam actually means, submission to the absolute. And that's why I was inspired to do a commentary on the entire Quran. It took me 10 years to complete, using about 4 or 5 different versions of the Quran, which I've got here, and the Arabic, which I understand, philosophically. And I went into the history behind the Quran. What was Muhammad doing when he received these different surahs? And I resonated with, trying to get back into the mind of Muhammad. What did he think he was saying with these surahs? And how much of Muhammad is in them and how much of God? And how can we tell the difference? That's a complex question for transpersonal psychology to answer, which is, my commentary is based on my concept of transpersonal history. So those are the Muslim books I used. Huge collection of stuff. And then above them you've got the Jewish books. I've travelled and met many rabbis around the place. I've studied the Hebrew Bible. Above all, the Kabbalah, which is the commentaries on the Bible. You can't understand the Hebrew Bible unless you study the Kabbalah. I realised that in my 20s. And I studied the Zohar in great detail, which is the core Kabbalistic text here. And it explains, word by word, what the actual Bible is all about. It was written down by a great sage, Moses de Leon, from Spain, in about the 1200s, but he based it on oral traditions that he'd inherited. And we would now say that he channeled some of it. The oral tradition is the core thing in the Kabbalah. and it predates the written Bible. You can't understand the written Bible unless you've studied the Kabbalah. Then we come up here to Hinduism, which is the Indian books. A lot of these books I've physically brought back from India. I've travelled there 10 times. You know, this book came from Kashi, the city of Shiva, otherwise known as Varanasi or Benares, where there's a great university, the Hindu University of Benares, which I've spent time studying in. The Standards on Vibration. It's a book about sound, sonic mysticism. Because in the Vedic Hindu tradition, they say God creates the world through sound. Well, how? You know, how does that work? So that's the book to study. And actually, what's so interesting is the Kabbalah says exactly the same thing. In the beginning, God created heavens and the earth, and God spoke, and there was light, and it was good. It's God speaking the world into creation. So it's the same teaching, actually, as I explored in the Philosophy Club. I also worked for 5 years with the Gandhi Foundation, a friend and colleague of the Gandhians of the world, because Gandhi was a Mahatma, a great soul. I honour him. He said we need to do spiritual enlightenment, not violence. Let's do non-violence. He was inspired by the rishis of old. And when I worked in London, I based my work in the ashram of the Gandhi Foundation, where he himself lived and taught in the 1930s. And so I've got a big collection of Gandhian literature. Then you come up here, you have the pre-Christian books. These books are all what we call ancient, primal, or pagan religions. So things like ancient Egyptian, the Norse runes, the Celtic Druids, the Greek and Roman, the myths and legends, and also the witches, the Wiccans, and the pagans of the planet, the Australian Aborigines, the Maori, and so on. So I'm a great specialist and lover of primal religions. When I taught at Birkbeck College with Lord Combermere, who's head of religious studies, he gave me the job. He said, Thomas, you know, you talk about primal religions, it's your thing. And I published widely. And that got me into studying Druidry and practicing, so that's why I became the Peace Druid of Britain. You know, it's a many lifetimes quest, because one thing they all believe in is reincarnation, right? Okay, let's move on here. Have a look round. I want you to look at the periodic table, particularly on your way round. So you'll see that the periodic table, they're colour-coded. The top ones, the light green ones, that's the pagan or primal religions, starting with shamanism, things like ancient Egypt, all the ones that are here in the upper section of the books. The red ones are Buddhist, the pink ones are Chinese, the Jewish are the peach ones down the side, humanists are the orange ones, Islam are the green ones, Hinduism the yellow, and the Christianities are the blue. You also have Jain and Sikh and Zoroastrian, and we'll see them in a minute. And then you have all the secular philosophical traditions like Kantianism and, Hegelianism and all the existentialism and so on, all the attempts to make reality sensible through philosophical study. And also you have a box for Pythagoreanism. Each of these boxes has detailed information about who practices it, when was it founded, how many people practice it, and so on. And that's all on its website. It has its own website. And I'd love this periodic table to be at every school and university around the world. I think this one thing could bring peace to mankind. If we all understood. There's a section for new religious movements, because there are new religions coming into being. And also there's a section for esoterics, so things like Freemasonry, Theosophy, Anthroposophy. You know, I'm a believer in let's put all our cards on the table and share wisdom with each other as a world. And if all our children grow up to know this table, there'd be no more religious wars. We'd be students of the mysteries together in humility, serving the 9 Muses collectively and making peace for humanity. That's the symbol of Polyhymnia herself. And the images are taken from a tarot pack that was created in Italy, interesting enough, which had the 9 Muses as part of them. So here I'm standing in front of this huge wall of books. These are the Christianities. So I'm also a Christian teacher and educator. I've worked in schools where Christianity is very important, like at St Mary's School in Caen, which is a great school. I loved teaching there. And I myself went to a Christian school called Brighton College. And I've pondered about the Christian mysteries for decades. I don't think they're taught very well. Partly because there's not enough time in the curriculum. The government thinks learning mathematics is more important than learning about spirituality and philosophy and ethics. I don't agree. So they give kids like 7 periods of maths and 1 little period of religion a week. And you're supposed to cram in all this knowledge into young minds just 1 period a week. Well, of course it's not going to happen. So what I've done in schools, I set up a philosophy club, and then kids would come after school or at lunchtime to learn in their own time. Christianity is really fascinating. How did it grow to be the biggest religion in the world? Who actually was Jesus? So I spent years tracking this down. And here we have Bibles in Latin and Greek, Aramaic, Norwegian, German, Gaelic. I've got a Gaelic Bible. Many different translations into English. And I've taught biblical studies. I don't think you can study Christianity without doing biblical studies. My daughter, Shanti Grace, who I taught some impromptu biblical studies classes, I'm pleased to say is about to train as a vicar in the church at having done her PhD hopefully at Cambridge. So she'll be just a scholar as well as a vicar. And yeah, Christianity is absolutely fascinating. So you've got books here about the Protestants, about the Catholics, about the Orthodox, plus the esoterics, so the Rosicrucians. I was the bookshop manager at the Steiner House for a while, who was a Rosicrucian from Germany and Austria. And I think the Christian mystics like Jacob Boehme are so interesting. So they're here. And what I've done is a commentary on all of the 6 Gospels. Now you say, why 6? I thought there were 4. Yes, there's Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. They're in the traditional Bibles. Like here, if you read the Bible, get the Bible out of the bookshop, you get 4 Gospels. And they're really important. I love them. I've done a detailed commentary on them, which you can listen to on my Green University website. But they're not the whole story. There are these other Gospels called the Gnostic Gospels, which are by Thomas, above all, who was an amazing disciple and who wanted proof. You see, I think Thomas was interesting. He wanted proof from Jesus. The official Gospels say that. And Jesus sent him to India, which is one hell of a mission place, because India is full of very, very profound, enlightened people. So I think Jesus realised Thomas was up for the job. I've been to the place in Chennai, or Madras, where traditionally Thomas was martyred because he ran up against some of the traditional vested interests of the religious elites of the time, who didn't want to hear about this risen master who had universal tidings of peace, because they were quite happy, running their little empires of knowledge. And that's the problem, isn't it? Anyway, my commentary on the Gospel of Thomas is important. And then I've done a commentary on the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, who was probably Jesus' consort, which isn't taught in the official Gospels. But after years of research, and we've had meetings here, conferences on Mary Magdalene studies, I've set up the Mary Magdalene Studies Association. I think it's pretty sure that she and Jesus were like what I call a wisdom affair. And her gospel we have in fragments. I've done a commentary on it. So this is like a live, ongoing bit of research we're doing here into the core mysteries of Christ, and particularly the Gnostic tradition. Because I'm sure, I know that Christ was a Gnostic teacher, which means simply a teacher of knowledge. I mean, if you think about it, you can't be a teacher unless you're teaching some kind of knowledge. I mean, I've written a huge 10-volume book called Being and Knowledge, which is a sequel to Sartre's Being and Nothingness. You know, as an educator, there's some kind of knowledge. All teachers teach. Well, Christ had some kind of knowledge to teach. And the Greek word for knowledge is gnosis. So, of course, he was a Gnostic teacher. All teachers are kind of teaching gnosis. But what was it specific about his methodology? What did he really mean by the kingdom of God is within you? What did he mean by the kingdom of God? I've tried to explain all this in my commentaries on the scriptures. And I think there's some brilliant theologians over the centuries have got there, you know, Meister Eckhart and to some extent Thomas Aquinas. There have been some brilliant minds working in the Christianities, and I've used them in my commentaries. We have now some brilliant thinkers alive. Matthew Fox comes to mind, who are trying to get to the core of what these teachings were. And I think they're parallel to and compatible with the official magisterium of the church, you know, as in, so I have a Vatican reader's ticket. I think that the church is doing brilliant stuff. They just need to talk to each other. And the Gnostic element of Christianity ought to be brought out more. I think Pope Francis is doing a great job at like reawakening the real core message of Christ, which is always about peace. It's never about bombings and killings. And I think Patriarch Cyril or Kirill in Moscow is really like, that's a fake Christianity that he's promoting with Putin, which is like, let's invade another country, which is after all mainly Christian, and let's bomb them and drive 8 million people out. I mean, that's completely anti-Christian. So we have fake people pretending to be Christians on the planet. How can we discern and work out what's the difference? That's what I'm trying to do here. And then we have also in this part of the room, we have the Chinese collection. So I have a large collection on Taoism, Shintoism, the Japanese religion, which I greatly admire. I've been to Hong Kong, but I haven't yet explored all the Taoist sites of China. I'd love to go when there's peace. The Tao Te Ching and the I Ching, you know, the masterpieces of work. I'm very mindful of the fact that it was Jesuits from France went to China, translated the I Ching into Latin, brought it back to Europe, and it was from that Leibniz, the great philosopher, invented binary mathematics, which is what's given us the digital age. You know, if you're watching this video, it's because of Leibniz, and ultimately because of the Jesuits' translation of the I Ching. I mean, that's just so cosmically symmetrical. That's why I love history, particularly intellectual history. You also have Sikhism here. These books are on Sikhs. I've been to the Punjab several times and met Sikh masters. I have a great respect for Guru Nanak and the 10 Gurus. And all the different branches of Sikhism, the Namdari Sikhs, their leader was a friend of mine, and I met him in just outside, you know, Amritsar, and we had long chats. And in fact, he came to a meeting in the House of Lords that I ran on ethics and politics. Because what I've done is I've invited religious leaders to come to Parliament to discuss how spirituality and policy can affect each other. So that's what's here. So thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed this little room. This Polyhymnia is quite an important muse.